if you had that one piece of advice for a professional early or mid-career, what would it be?
Trust your instincts. On all the different levels we've been talking, trust your instincts. There's nobody who knows you better than you know yourself when you get right down to it. And then surround yourself with people who make you feel better than you feel as often as possible.
Welcome to this week's As Unexpected podcast, when we talk to C-suite executives, entrepreneurs, and philanthropists about how they lead into the future when the future generally goes as unexpected. I'm Scott Marshall, your host, and my own professional experience has made me a believer that it's not how you show up when all goes as planned, but it is how you show up when things go as unplanned. Given all of their experiences, each of our guests has become very attuned to the fact that the future is not to be predicted. My hope is that this podcast can help all of you become better leaders by building the core leadership capabilities for leading in an uncertain world. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of As Unexpected. Thank you for joining. Today's guest is someone who, we've known each other for a number of years and talked by phone, talked by video, but we've never met in person. Someday that's going to happen. But for now, we're on video and audio again. It's such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Everybody, please welcome Louis Patler. Louis, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Scott. Thank you. Greetings to everybody out there in Cyberland that's watching right now. Looking forward to a conversation.
For sure. Louis, you have a really cool background. So let's start with going over that and making sure our listeners know all of your professional background. You've been truly a leading thinker and actor in the world of strategy. And I think it would be awesome for our listeners to learn about that background and your current work.
Well, I'll just be brief. I went to, I was first in my family to graduate high school. And then the first, of course, to graduate from college at UCLA, and then the first to get a PhD along the way. So, it's kind of been working on up for my bootstraps, as they say. I spent about 16, 18 years in academia, and then and I'll tell you later maybe a story about how that all started in academia. But I then got married and had what began to be 5 adult children now, 5 kids. And after the second one, I knew I had to leave academia in order to support a large family. I always wanted a large family. So I cut my eye teeth in the business world by researching trends. I had a PhD in sociological theory, which who knows what that means, right? But I did learn how to find things out and to snoop around. So it served me well in doing trend analysis, spotting things early on before they took hold nation or world or universal wide. Did that for 2 or 3 years, and then got an opportunity because of that work to co-author my first book, which was called "If It Ain't Broke, Break It." And in a podcast like this called "As Unexpected," it's a title that probably will resonate with a lot of the viewers because as unexpected, the unexpected part of it was manifold, one of which was getting a contract that allowed that name to be put into place at a time when in the culture was, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I did that. And the other unexpected thing apropos to the book was a month later, it went to the New York Times bestseller list, was reprinted in magazines all over the world, portions of it. And that launched the opportunity for me to go out on my own. And I started a consulting company because I got good advice always, as I've heard you say a million times. It's important to have mentors and teachers who guide you, people who've been through it before. So when I had this best-selling book out, came out of the blue unexpectedly, I had no idea what to. So what do I do now? And the advice was, get yourself up for consulting because that lasts a while. You have this little window with a new book. So the other two things is go on the speaker circuit, and secondly, create training programs or other things where you can leverage what you know in your brain to have other people deliver it. So I did those three things and started the B.I.T group. B.I.T is as in Business Innovation Trends, inclusive within which is leadership and strategy and innovation, which are to me the three-legged stool of things. So I did that, and then subsequently, because of the success of the first book, of course, I was fortunate enough to kind of had carte blanche to write other books. I've done 5 books since then. They're all sort of in the business genre, but they all have a little twist to them. 2 of my books were, I'm proud to say, were on Steve Jobs's recommended reading list to when they do orientation for new Apple employees in a period of time when he was still alive. I don't know if they still do it, but not only 1, but 2 books, 2 of my books. The second book was Don't Compete, Tilt the Field. Create your own market and then fill it.
Yeah.
You know, so I did that, and I've done consulting. I've been involved with that all along, and through it all, there have been a few things that have been the glue that's held everything together in my life. One of which, of course, was all the professional work and writing. But the other one has been, which you will understand fully, has been Semester at Sea, which I've been involved with for over 50 years. And when I saw that your podcast was called As Unexpected, the first story that came to my mind, if you don't mind, I'll just share it with you, was as follows. I was all but dissertation, as they say in academic world. I had everything done, but I was really young. I graduated high school at 17 and UCLA at 21, and I'm like 23 or 24 years old. I'm almost completely done with my PhD. I had never been on an airplane. I never had a passport, never been outside the U.S., etc., except to go to graduate school in Michigan. So May or June, I'm just winding up for the academic year of my final year of grad school. I passed my orals, and there's this poster from Chapman College about this thing called World Campus Afloat, whatever that was. And it had, you remember the posters had a little tear off phone numbers at the bottom? So what do I know? I'm walking down a hall, I see the poster. I say, God, I never heard of this thing. This is for me. So I take the thing home. The next morning, I called Chapman College. I talked to this very sweet lady who's the assistant to the dean at Chapman College. And she says, hello, how are you? I said, fine. I'm inquiring about this wonderful program I just heard about, the World Campus Afloat. I'd like to see about applying for a faculty position. And she said, oh, wonderful, wonderful. Let me ask you a couple of questions. First, can you tell me about your teaching experience? I said, oh, well, I don't really have any. I've been a TA. But I don't have much in the way of teaching experience. She paused. She chuckles. Very sweet. She says, okay, well, the second question is, how about publications? I said, well, none. I have just about finished my doctorate, and there'll be some publications I know that are in the pipeline. She chuckled and she said, I can tell from your voice you sound like you're pretty young. I can tell from your answers to your questions that you're about to start your career. She says, we at Chapman always have trouble finding younger faculty members. And, down the road a piece, who knows what might happen. Stay in touch. She said, I'm obligated to send you the forms to fill out. I'm obligated. But in reality, don't hold your breath. I said, okay, I understand now. That makes perfect sense to me. We hang up the phone. A few days later, this manila folder comes in the mail from Chapman College. I know what it is. I set it aside. I go ahead and I apply for the Peace Corps. I'm accepted the Peace Corps with a startup date of September, so 3 months or so out, and I'm assigned to go to Ethiopia. So the summer wears on. I'm gathering my stuff, and it's early August maybe, and I come back to this manila folder, and oh yes, Chapman College. Yes, I've got to fill this out. By the time I'm done with the Peace Corps and I teach a little bit, at least I'll be in the pipeline. So I take the forms out. Of course, it's pre-internet, so everything's done by hand, right? I fill it out. I write this, what I think is very professional cover letter. Put the whole package together, staple it, put it in the envelope, just about to seal the envelope, and I'm thinking to myself, what can I do? And I'll use your terminology. What can I do that's sort of unexpected? I took the pack out. This is a true story. I took the cover letter off, and I wrote in a red pen, felt pen, in big letters over the cover letter, a few words that changed my life. I can leave with 24 hours notice. I figured the only competitive advantage I had was I'm completely mobile. I haven't taught, but I'm mobile. That was my advantage. So I sent it in the mail. I'm packing up to go to Ethiopia. And it's the last Friday, I think, in August. The phone rings about 2 p.m. And it's this wonderful lady from Chapman College. She says, "Hi, do you remember me? I'm such and such from Chapman College. I have to talk to you quickly." I said, "Okay, what's going on?" She said, "Our social science professor had a stroke this morning. We're sailing on Monday. I remembered what you said, and I have to ask you, can you commit to coming and teaching?" This is fall of 1970. We're leaving from New York, but I need to know now. I have a couple of other people I can contact, but yours was the first thing that came to my mind. I said, give me a second. I took a deep breath and I said, "I'll do it. I don't know how. I'll do it." And so but I said, "I've never been on a plane." So she said, "Just go ahead and book a flight. We'll reimburse you." I said, "I don't have a passport." She said, "Well, we have connections at the embassy. We'll take care of getting you at least something to carry it. Just get here." So that began what for me was the blessings of the unexpected.
Yeah.
With
Louis, there's so much in what you just shared. And I'm actually to go back to some of the very early stuff you talked about. Excuse me. And that is that you were first gen high school, first gen college, and of course everything was first gen thereafter. First gen, I think, with a passport, first gen to see all these other countries. There's so many things that you did. And there has to be something in you innate around the willingness to be courageous and curious. That drive. So maybe you could just explore that a little bit. Where did that come from? How did you get this willingness to be courageous and just curious about the world? But boy, the courage to do so many things that led to unexpected opportunities.
That's a great and really perceptive question. There have been a couple of 3 times I've asked myself that, not recently, but let me put it this way: as long as I can remember, I've always sought out the unexpected. I was never reactionary. I'm not a reactionary person. So, for example, in a whole other genre, which contributed to this courage, as you called it, I've always played baseball my whole life. I've always been the youngest kid who wanted to play with the older kids. I always wanted to be with the kids who were better than me because every time the ball was hit, it was an unexpected. You don't know what to expect. So sports was part of the equation. definitely early on. And also, I've been kind of a Renaissance person. Your word was perfect. Curious, even more than courage. For me, it's just insatiably curious, and so yeah, I have this whole. You could look at here's like my biography back here. I have this background, and I'm still involved with sports, baseball. Still playing baseball. I've always loved to write, so I got involved with creating a poetry and poetics degree program at the university where I was teaching, the first of its kind in the country. So I've now been to 102 countries, uh, and all of this is part of this insatiable drive and curiosity, and almost always um, linked to uh, the 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 desire to be refreshed and the desire to figure out new things. So, for example, I just noticed I haven't owned a watch in over 50 years. The reason was when I was at UCLA, and I of course had my trusty watch stuff. I forgot it one day, and I'm, believe it or not, relatively introverted and shy, and I was a commuting student. I didn't have the money to live in a dorm and all that. So when I didn't have my watch, I found myself going up to people and saying, "Do you know what time it is?" And a conversation would start. So there's been some of that, and then also on the ship. When I was on semester at sea, it ended up for several semesters as a faculty member, and then many other times for what they call the enrichment voyages and as interport lecturer. I had another driving force in my life, which was music. So I've always played drums, and when I got on the ship for the first time, uh, I ended up in Sierra Leone, West Africa. There had been a kind of a maintenance issue and an accident involving the ship, and it had to be repaired. And we had extra time in Sierra Leone, and I started just again courageously, I guess you say, roaming around the back streets and alleys of Sierra Leone, and I came upon this old man who at the time must have been in his 70s, who was a drum maker. And since I played drums, I used to. We had 3 weeks in that port, just due to the time what it took to fix things. So I'd go there every day and hang out with him. He taught me rhythms, and he had this really beautiful old drum of his and stuff. And when the ship was about to leave, he had his grandson uh, chase me down as I'm going to board the ship and handed me his drum,
Wow. Yeah.
the grandfather's original drum that I had learned to play on. And ever since then, another part of what I've been doing is I've been collecting drums um, every place I go in the world. So I have over 300 drums, um, about 30 of which are on the ship. Um, and I've been involved. So I've been involved with sports and the arts and poetry and music, um, and a little time in academia and so on. And all those things are contributors, to the whole picture.
This episode of As Unexpected is sponsored in part by Semester at Sea, a study abroad program for college students and adults on career breaks, sabbaticals, or retired, interested in learning and exploring the world together. Learn more about the Lifelong Learner program at www.semesteratSea.org. Yeah, and so you talked about this insatiable curiosity. It sounds like that probably was then inherent, that you started to, on your own, think about trends. You got to really think about what are the major things going on in the world, and you're probably attending to that more than people you're talking to, and you probably saw some opportunity there. I want to go back to the title of your first book, which is, it says it all. It says, listen, everybody needs to think differently than they are. And I'm going to put it right out there on the cover.
Yep.
It plays off something that, of course, had become sort of popular mythology. And you put it right out there that it's time to bust that myth. It's time to reframe. So can you talk about how your own way of thinking about the world sort of gave you permission to write a book that said, "Hey, if it's not broken, then break it." I mean, that is a beautiful framing. It's something I believe in as well. That we always have to challenge common understanding, common approaches. It's not that we always have to break it, but we better be thinking about breaking it. So I'm curious, where did that come from? This sense of I got to challenge, common views and
Yeah,
stereotypes and
yeah.
mythologies.
I, I think the answer to your question is other directed. That I always knew there were people out there who did things differently, and I wanted to know who they were and attach myself to them and learn from them. Again, that's the sports thing, it's the music thing. Who And it wasn't that I was going out there to break the rules. I was going out there to not accept the the status quo, but rather to develop a methodology within myself to seek out alternative ways of seeing and doing. And I'll tell you that there was a moment in time, and I can remember this vividly. And I'm sure everybody watching this can perhaps relate to this one. The first time I ever went snorkeling and put a mask on and went into the water and looked down, and I saw there was an entirely other world there. It never occurred to me. I guess I was like 15 or 13 or whatever. And I hadn't been able to travel. So I knew the ocean well because I always loved to surf and stuff. The top of the water was very calming and familiar to me, but it was this whole other world coexisting. So I've always been drawn to the coexisting worlds in the plural, and that's sort of the almost a anthropological interest.
Yeah. So I love this other directedness. I mean, that's where we learn is by listening, watching, interpreting. And I think this is a great point to bring in two of my dear colleagues because they have a pretty interesting question for us, particularly as we think about current times. Let's watch the video from Kookie and Cam,
Okay.
and I'd love to get your response from them.
Okay.
How important do you think emotional intelligence is for effective leadership?
Ooh, I honestly think that's a great question, especially given what we know about the state of the world these days. It's just really a busy time globally. So much going on, and you never know how one particular situation or one particular news event really impacts the person that you're talking with at work or, sending a Slack to or so on. And so I think being a high empathy and emotionally intelligent leader is really critical to supporting any sort of workforce these days. And I think emotional intelligence is at the key or is at the center of that. And I wonder what everyone else thinks.
All right. We talk about emotional intelligence. What does it really mean? And does it really matter?
Well, I'll start with the second question. It matters a lot. And it's one of a variety of intelligences. Back in the day, initially intelligence. I remember the first definition I heard was intelligence is what intelligence tests test. Because it was like easier to measure than define. You can throw out a number. Oh, he must be smart because he's got 135 IQ. Well, it's just what intelligence tests test. But you take the person who has 135 IQ and you walk through the back streets of a lot of parts of the world. If you don't have street smarts, you're not very intelligent. You're not going to get very far. So that's the first part of it. Emotional intelligence. I was so glad when that phrase got coined around the 1990s or something like that. However, I have a post-it here. This is from a poem by John Keats in 1817, which I believe was the first instance of what we now know to be emotional intelligence. Okay to read
All
it?
right. Yeah, please.
I literally have it here. I wrote it out years ago. It's called a negative capability. And this is, Keats was reflecting on when he first read and got Shakespeare, what Shakespeare was doing with Shakespeare's writing. So he says, negative capability is when a man is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, and doubts without any irritable reaching after fact or reason.
Okay.
Being comfortable in uncertainty, seeking out the mysteries, moving on without doubts, and don't rely upon or revert to just the facts and just logic. That there are other variables, emotion being one of them. So, for example, you have emotional intelligence. Of course, nowadays the big issue is artificial intelligence, and I just say, remember what the first word in that phrase is. It's artificial. It doesn't have an emotional content necessarily. It can't read. It can't read the room. It can't smell the anxiety in somebody or the joy in somebody who just cooked something, right? So emotional intelligence is absolutely crucial, and it's one of those variables that does separate, in my judgment, a real leader from an arbitrary leader who's only a leader by virtue of like some assigned role that they have. And my axiom for many years is that, much like innovation, leadership is everybody's everyday job. It's not something for the chosen few to lead. Drum roll. They're leading. Look,
Yeah.
it's everybody's everyday job all the time. You're looking for opportunities to do this. Innovation, also misunderstood often. I mean, people are making innovative breakthroughs every day. Moms and dads who are stay-at-home moms and dads are inventing stuff to figure out how to do this thing. Chemists are figuring out stuff on another level. And again, it's part of my curiosity about craving and seeking out the unexpected. So
Yeah.
emotional intelligence is key, is a key variable.
Yeah, and I love how you conveyed that into what is leadership. I am a big believer that leadership is not positional. Leadership is a practice, regardless of position. And it's how we exercise that leadership capacity, regardless of what our job description is, regardless of the organization we work at. And to your point, I think a big part of that is what I would classify as compassion, which is this curiosity around the other person, starting with that. You talked about being other directed, really starting there and understanding who is this person? What is their context? What are their ambitions? How can I support them? How can I be a part of their own journey? And emotional intelligence writ large is showing up as a person who is curious and and caring about the other.
Yeah,
Love it. Love
yeah.
it.
Thanks.
So
Well, it's also the other word. The other twin word for that is empathy. It's an
yeah,
empathic. It's an empathic sensibility,
you
and
bet.
it transfers into any arena, not just on the psychologist's couch or something. It's everywhere. I remember I did a project with $1 billion uh, food company. They did a lot of big brands like Old El Paso and Pet evaporated milk, because they were all owned by this conglomerate. And I was brought in with my team because they had 7 huge manufacturing plants, each of which generated $300 to $400 million a year of products. But there were dramatic differences in productivity, in injury rates, in waste from plant to plant. Each had their strengths, but not so. So they brought us in. We started out to do an analysis of each of the 7 plants, but pretty soon the empathic side of me said, "Now wait a minute. These are all really capable people, but they've all been in their roles for a long time." So what I did was I had the 7 plant managers swap jobs with each other. We drew out of a hat, and I had the plant manager from plant A go to plant C and for a week or two, and then we all reconvened. And the task or challenge to each of them was, with fresh eyes, what did you see? What did you see in the way of sickness, injuries, productivity, the way the warehouses are set up, what did you see? And they'd shared it with one another. And it was simple things they saw, like in the big warehouses where there'd been a lot of damage from forklifts bumping into things. This one plant manager had just bought 20 old truck tires and stacked them at each corner of the aisles so that forklifts would hit the tires first, right?
Yeah.
So all the plants adopted that, and so on. 6 months after the project's over, my client, who is the chief manufacturing officer, sends me a note saying, "You were not going to believe this, but we just did a audit of everything and all the new measures, and we also added the reduction in sick time and stuff. We saved $43 million last year just by looking for unexpectedly with fresh eyes."
Yeah.
That's
beautiful. That's a great story, Louis. Hey, we are at time. This has been a super conversation. Thank you for all of your stories, all of your reflections. Really great stuff. If we could just finish, if you had that one piece of advice for a professional early or mid-career, what would it be?
Trust your instincts.
There you go.
On all the different levels we've been talking. Trust your instincts. There's nobody who knows you better than you know yourself when you get right down to it. So, and then surround yourself with people who make you feel better than you feel, as often as possible.
Love it. Perfect finish. Big gong. Thank you for your time, Louis. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Scott. Congrats on this program. It's well done.
Thank you. This episode of As Unexpected is sponsored in part by Semester at Sea, a study abroad program where students visit 10 countries on 3 continents, all while taking 3 to 4 college classes through Colorado State University. See course offerings and upcoming voyage itineraries at www.semesteratsea.org. Thank you for joining this week's episode of the As Unexpected podcast. The viewpoints and opinions of featured guests do not necessarily represent those of the Institute for Shipboard Education or Semester at Sea. Hit the like button, share it with your colleagues, family, and friends, and remember, be curious, be compassionate, be courageous. That's what it takes to lead as unexpected.